we have accumulated a large vocabulary of terms that mostly refer to non-ordinary states of consciousness that one enters through the practice of meditation, right? And that opens one to not only to the latent potentialities of higher consciousness, but also reveals the subconscious and the sedimentary layers that underlie the ego's current identity, right? Which go back all the way to the prenatal period and infancy and childhood, adolescence, etc., right? And all of those sedimentary layers can obscure and suppress the presence of the lowest sedimentary levels, but they're still there, and they often have the power to erupt and collapse the conscious mind at its current level by triggering a re-traumatization of some forgotten, unbearable memory, right? I'm sure you've probably had that experience, right? So the process of Sat Yoga is one of purification of those sanskaras, there's one word for you, which are collapsed wave functions, qualium wave functions, which create fixations, predispositions, and tendencies, habits of thought, belief systems, and attitudes, orientations, all of that kind of thing that will determine the way that you will look at a phenomenon. And it also includes, let's say, veils of projections into the environment, because you tend to see what you have known in the past and assume that the present is a repetition in some way. This person is like your mother or like your father or what, and that projection then, which may have a grain of some truth, at least at some superficial level of a trait of behavior or looks, etc. But it will then it will warp the relationship and cause a provocation of a repetition of the trauma that was connected to that original other, right? So we're always in one of these kind of psychic whirlpools as long as we're in the ego level, and there isn't the power to escape the pull toward what we call the lower death drive, which are the lower chakras, which are energy forms that have motivated consciousness in its development. But that development often remains stunted because of a repression of unbearable information, that because one doesn't want to see it, one takes defensive measures. And these lead to reactive traits that in yoga they refer to as the gunas. The gunas are often translated as meaning qualities of consciousness. Sometimes you'll see it translated as attributes. Sometimes it will be as habit patterns of predictive programming of how your life is going to unfold, etc. But really, we could say that the gunas refer to bandwidths. If we think of consciousness as on a spectrum of frequencies, and your mind is like a radio with many possible wavelengths, from the very lowest, maybe depressed, suicidal, furious, dreading kind of states, to the most joyous and blissful and ecstatic kinds of states, and everything in between. But the spectrum of consciousness that at the high end goes all the way to the realization of God and the absolute beyond the event horizon of duality itself and beyond the illusion of the existence of a cosmos outside of consciousness. All of those fall away at the highest level, but at the lowest level, the consciousness becomes very dense and fixed with a very small, let's call it a mimetic archive, a set of repertoires of imitations of past others who have become a part of the quilt of consciousness with its sub-personalities and its fixed ways of reacting to particular situations. So the ancient yogis have divided the possible sets of qualities, or gunas. The word is guna, or you'll hear it sometimes as gun. We can drop the A in Sanskrit in certain grammatical cases. But a guna is, as I say, a bandwidth, and there are three different levels and types of gunas at different vibrational frequencies. The names of these, can you write these on? Are sattva, rajas, and tamas. The adjectives being rajasic, tamasic, sattvic. So the tamasic guna, that quality of consciousness, arises and becomes dominant when there is so much past trauma that one has to be engaged in an active defense against collapsing into it. Okay? And that active defense will often require the blacking out of one's consciousness entirely because it's too painful to endure. Just the whatever thoughts and feelings are coming up are too awful. And so this leads to alcoholism and the deadening of one's pain through chemicals, and other drugs are used for the same purpose. And so the tendency to not want to be conscious can lead in the most extreme to a suicidal tendency. But it's always a tendency of fear of one's own consciousness, and therefore a desire not to know what's really going on below the surface. There's a resistance to knowledge, to truth, even though truth sets you free. But before you get free, you've got to feel all of your bondage, and that pain is the residue of the consciousness having been captured under the influence of another that it has never been able to fully escape. So we could say that what the ego is a development of a set of defensive reactions and compensations in order to survive that unbearable pain. One way within the Tomasic is the elimination of as much consciousness as possible. Another way of being Tomasic is the obscuring or denying of moral consciousness. And then one becomes criminal, psychopathic, completely uncaring about the other, willing to harm the other. You know, people who are, if you can imagine someone taking up a career as an armed robber, you know, they would have to be in a pretty psychopathic state. And of course, there would be a sedimentary history of how that evolved, but nonetheless, the Tomasic can be that kind of a demonic choice, or that choice simply to to minimize one's capacity to know. And that can lead to habits of attention deficit and just general spacing out and being in daydreams rather than being present, or being in constant states of nostalgia or of rehearsal of unhappy moments and of experiences of feeling lack and inadequacy, and I should have said this and I should have done that, and I missed my chance to do this, and all of those kinds of regretful, remorseful, and basically self-sabotaging tendencies. But also it can enact as an aggressivity and a sabotage of the other. So all of this is within the Tomasic, right? Enough said, I won't belabor that. The second bandwidth, the Rajasic, is more the workaholic, or there's really two levels of Rajasic, right? The second assemblage point and the third are both generally Rajasic, but the second is more obsessive and motivated by aggressivity and paranoia, that has to fixate on particular things and perhaps become obsessive compulsive and that kind of thing. And then at the third assemblage point, it's more of a productivity workaholism that is a running away from oneself, but into producing something that has a value that compensates for one's internal feeling of a lack of value as a being worthy of love. And one will try to work one's way out of the hole through good works and acts of kindness and generosity, etc. And when the sublimation channels open up, then the consciousness is motivated by the sattvic vibrational frequency, which is much more governed by ideals. Ideals of goodness, of purity, of generosity, of becoming a bodhisattva, ideals of communion and sharing and giving and including and of, in general, creating a kind of one for all for one sort of attitude that is necessary if any kind of a sustainable community is to be brought into manifestation. So the sattvic is, you could say, the highest vibrational frequency reachable by the ego consciousness. And the ego consciousness is, you could say, coextensive with who you believe you are as a psychological entity. Okay? A being who is basically constantly thinking and constantly identified with the bodily vehicle and concerned with the well-being of that vehicle, and which has has various psychological motivations, complexes, tendencies, etc. But there is an intention to overcome the internal conflicts that are always there below the surface, because that Tomasic level of the subconscious is there, and the ego is always governed by an agency of what is equivalent to the deep state in political terms, or a central intelligence agency, a censor that will prevent your conscious mind from even being curious about certain things, or remembering certain things, or retaining certain information that could trigger an eruption of a past trauma, etc. So there is a governing agency that is not within the threshold of awareness or control by the conscious mind. And so this always leads to a sense of helplessness and hopelessness in trying to transform the ego's structure and its dynamic way of enacting its pre-installed algorithms. Okay? That's the psychological entity. There's one more assemblage point that's still within the ego, but that I would say refers to the paranormal capacities of consciousness.